Herbert Esmahan, a political analyst here in El Salvador, talked to me a little more about Bukele's rise to power. It's actually kind of significant visiting here even just a few months apart and seeing how much infrastructure has been built, how many hotels and buildings have been completed, and actually how stable the country's remained, right?
Correct.
This is not a temporary fix. This is a long-term solution. I want to talk to you about Bukele's rise to not just power, but to prominence on the global stage. And El Salvador's incredible recovery that seems so natural, but also it feels like it's only the beginning. You've been here for a very, very long time, Herbert. You've been here since you were a child. Talk to me a little bit about what the El Salvador looked like before Bukele, the El Salvador that you grew up in.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, Elijah. It's truly a pleasure to be here and to talk about the progress that we're seeing in El Salvador. El Salvador in the past lived in a very, very dark situation in which families could not send their children to school. People could not open their businesses because they would be murdered. They would be kidnapped. They would be extortioned. Quite often, we would see situations in which they would even board public transport to mug everyone on board, regardless if they were old or if they were young, regardless. And if the people didn't pay, they would set the whole public transport bus on fire, killing dozens of victims at once. This was common practice by the satanic gangs that once ruled over El Salvador before President Bukele. What we're seeing now in El Salvador is a nation that's healing, a nation that has been given a future that had been taken away by the corrupt politicians of the past, who never cared about the well-being of El Salvador or its people. They only cared about being in power. They only cared about the allegiances they had to foreign interests that wanted to keep El Salvador in a state of permanent conflict. Now with President Bukele, we see how this has completely changed for the best. President Bukele has not only restored our democracy, our sovereignty, but he has restored the patriotism within the hearts of every Salvadoran.
Well, and let's talk about that. I mean, I don't want to get you in trouble, but I have to say, I went past the embassy, the United States Embassy. It was pretty damn big. I mean, it was looked like a State Department for the nation. And this is not the United States. And it's no secret that the United States, the CIA, and our intelligence have had a lot of action, especially through the Cold War in Central and South America. Some of it the United States population agrees with. Some of it they disagree with, and others of it they probably don't even know about. But, some of the groups that were involved in this, you mentioned to me earlier that, there's about 30 years of corruption, of gang violence that sort of culminated to this El Salvador that the Americans are so familiar with, the place where people are murdered and are mugged. This is sort of the vision that Americans still have of this place. The average American who's not up to date, doesn't go on the news, they still think that this is a third world country where Americans should not go, right? It's like Cuba or some nation like North Korea, and that's really what they feel. And so, when you look back and you grow up and you were growing up, who were these groups that over 30 years were making El Salvador an unlivable place for the people? A combination, was it gangs? Was it governments? Was it ideologies like communists? I mean, who were these people?
Look, I will tell you something, Elijah. El Salvador considers the United States its greatest ally, and they have been, and they continue to be. What I will say is that there always exists a interest from globalist elites around the world. It doesn't necessarily have to limit itself to the continent of America. It can come from other continents as well, that seeks to maintain Latin American countries in a constant state of chaos. Why is this, you might ask? This is because if a country is in chaos, not only is it easy to control, but it's also very easy to do illicit business. Like, for example, if order is restored in Latin America, what does that mean? That means that hordes of illegal immigrants will no longer head towards the north. That means that cartels will no longer be able to use these countries to transport their drugs towards the north. Therefore, if you restore order in Latin America, you are hindering the interests of many criminal structures, most of the time international criminal structures, that seek to use these countries as pawns to be able to operate. But now that leaders like President Bukele are rising, this puts El Salvador in a position that sets a positive example for neighboring countries. It shows neighboring countries that they don't have to be subordinates to anyone, that they deserve to be treated with respect. They deserve to be treated as sovereign nations. And President Bukele has done a very good job at restoring, reclaiming our sovereignty as a nation. El Salvador is no longer a bridge for cartels. El Salvador is no longer a hive for criminal structures, and it certainly will never serve international interests ever again.
And it's an interesting thing that you bring up because, it's not just Central America and South America that serve as a bridge. I mean, you have the no borderland, right? Ukraine, that's currently just seen as a conduit for NATO and for, Western Europe to sort of wage this, war of civilizations on Russia, sort of like what the United States has been warring this war on terror, right? This neocon battle where countries are sort of caught the split hairs of a much larger issue. And it seems like El Salvador, for better or for worse, had just been used as a pawn, and that it lacked identity. But the people here are very resilient, I've noticed that. But there's something strange that I want to ask you about. I talk to the people here, and they cry to me in vehicles. They cry to me on the street, and they're not drunk. Sit at the bar. They're sober individuals, hardworking people, telling me how much their life has changed. How many thousands of dollars they were being extorted from these criminal cartels. And I want to get into the actual discussion as we're talking about the history here of the gangs, of the occult, of the true brutality of what was happening here, so people get an understanding of really what Bukele is up against, what the people have been up against, and why they believe in him. And I want to do that because people somehow think that Bukele is like Kim Jong-un, or he's some, Maduro, or some dictator that's forcing or imposing his will upon the people. And that's not what I'm seeing here. And I don't think that's true. So let's talk about this extortion and what the gangs were doing on the ground. What was life like for an average El Salvadoran in terms of their interactions with the gangs? And I'm not talking about cartels, the drug trade. I mean, an average Joe just trying to pay for his kids, to eat. What was life like for them as a small business owner in the country?
Absolutely. All right, let's start here. There's two answers to your question. First, let's start with what it used to be like in the past. In the past, the moment you opened a business, whether it was a little convenience store, a little restaurant, whatever, you name it, you would get a knock on your door by a gang member who would come and collect his weekly allowance, or his weekly rent, as they used to call it. This could range anywhere from $100 to $200, which is a lot of money in El Salvador. And if you did not pay the amount that they requested, they wouldn't come over and break your window. No, they would literally come in broad daylight and shoot you or one of your relatives or employees right in the face in front of everyone and get away with it. Because our legal system in the past was absolutely broken. It was designed to keep El Salvador in a state of chaos. These gang members committed atrocious murders. They would go in, and due to a supposed lack of evidence, which was simply not true because sometimes they were even on camera, they would be released because they would threaten the judges. And if that was not the case, maybe they belonged to higher structures that allowed them to roam free. And now we are seeing a justice system that is not only functional and effective, but has healed an entire nation. If it weren't for President Bukele, we would still be living in the chaos that El Salvador had to endure in the past. Children couldn't go to school. There's very humble communities that have to send their children to school on foot. Sometimes these kids would not come back home. Sometimes they wouldn't even make it to their school. And another thing worth mentioning, a lot of the times, these schools weren't even schools. They weren't even proper structures. They were literally a little wooden shack that the governments of the past called an investment in education. But in reality, they were stealing the money and they weren't giving anything to the people. Now you see how President Bukele is building schools on a daily basis, proper structures, first world structures, to give our children and our future generations dignity. You see how people are opening businesses. You see how tourism's coming in, which is helping finance these businesses. You see a complete change that would not have been possible had President Bukele not been strong and firm against the international globalist system that wanted to oppose progress.
Yeah, and so you bring this up, and I know that some people, were even, a girl told me that she was able to now send her daughter to private school with the money that she saved that she was getting extorted. But it was even worse, right? People were getting nickel and dimed on the bus. Like, people were being asked to give nickels and dimes just to be able to ride in this public infrastructure that in many ways wasn't even public. These are private drivers. So you're paying a driver, you're not even paying the state. Nothing's improving. And then you're just getting nickel and dime. It's a self-destructive model. But I know that, it seemed like here it wasn't just normal crime. It seemed like it was genuine evil. The things that these people were doing, I mean, it's not just exclusive to El Salvador. In Mexico as well, you see, the chopping off of limbs, skinning people. It's graphic, but hanging them from bridges. I mean, beheading children and saying the heads to their parents. Like, this is not, petty African-American crime in inner city Chicago where, some sort of rival and they're, spraying bullets and some people accidentally get killed, a kid on the street. Horrible stuff. It also needs to be dealt with in our country. This is targeted evil that some people here, a very religious country, very, very Catholic, would say was demonic. And it appears that that's not just some folklore. These gangs actually were connected to the occult, and they claim to be connected to Satanism. Tell me about that.
Yeah, there is definitely a ritualistic element to the crime that they used to commit in El Salvador when they were allowed to. As a Christian Catholic, I am a firm believer that the battle we are facing globally doesn't limit itself to politicians. It's not a battle between politicians. It is a spiritual battle. And some are fighting towards for the light. Others are fighting for darkness. And these criminal structures, like MS-13 and the rival gang that used to also rule in El Salvador, Barrio 18, had satanic backgrounds. Barrio 18 used to get the 3 sixes tattooed on themselves and the Green Reaper. They also had satanic cults, which the government has documented. When they raided all of these gangs, they documented the satanic altars that they had. They had a cult that worshipped the Grim Reaper. They, similar to what the cartels and criminal structures in Mexico also do. And within these cults, many of them have confessed that they did perform rituals in which they committed child sacrifice, in which they killed people to honor these dark forces that they believed they were serving. MS-13 doesn't lag behind. They also participated in similar rituals. There is definitely a spiritual, ritualistic element to these criminal structures. That is something that every citizen of the world should be aware of, because the international media intentionally wants to keep the populace blind to the fact that there is a war on the other side, not on the physical realm, but on the spiritual realm. And it's very important to be aware of both, because if you're not aware of the war that's occurring in the spiritual realm, you will not be effective in the physical realm. That is a fact. President Bukele has a very strong and firm faith in God. I testify to that. And if it weren't for God, it would have been very difficult to achieve the miraculous turnaround he has achieved for El Salvador. He himself has said it, and I, as a Salvadoran citizen, as an independent political analyst, have seen it myself. God has been by President Bukele's side, and a lot of these victories, we owe them all to him.
So will that cause any problems, or does that cause any problems domestically or internationally? Trump, the president of the United States, and some of our congresswomen like Marjorie Taylor Greene, they've touted they believe in angels. They believe in God not as an ideology, but God as a real being, right? Someone in control. Are often mocked by our media, and they're not taken seriously. It's like the mainstream media says, well, you believe in angels? Like, how can we think you care about the issues of the world? How does his faith, play into him being trusted by the people? Like, is it an act? I mean, you said you know it. I mean, everybody says they're religious when they need to be, right? You have Mamdani.
President Bukele is genuinely religious. In his personal life, in his private life, he is genuinely a believer in God. And I tell you that I know I've seen myself how he has given to God every one of the burdens that he has faced, every single challenge that he has faced during his time in government. And he has come out successful out of everyone. El Salvador, which translates to the Savior, is named after Jesus Christ, the Son of God. This is a very religious nation. We're a very conservative society. And something worth mentioning is that a lot of the globalist media, a lot of the globalist elites, they try to divide the peoples of the world. They try to split nations in two. Imagine a system called democracy imposed by the globalist agenda that is designed to separate the peoples into opposing fractions, into absolute enemies that hate each other. That's like a cancer within a nation. President Bukele has done something completely different. He has brought about true democracy, which is uniting the people to work together for the well-being of themselves and their countries. This is a big turnaround. A true democratic system brings unity, not division, not separation of the people. Because if you separate the people, you are essentially separating the nation.
A quick break from the main topic. You know, crypto's been making waves in traditional finance, and I've got something that I think you'll find pretty compelling, especially if you're tracking how digital assets are reshaping business strategies. You've likely heard about companies like MicroStrategy or Tesla adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets. And by the way, Bitcoin is an amazing investment. But this is part of the Bitcoin treasury strategy, where businesses hold crypto as a long-term store of value or a hedge against inflation instead of just cash. It's a significant shift in how companies manage their reserves. Here's where it gets interesting. Hyperbit Technologies, trading under HYPE in Canada and HYPAF in the USA, is carving out a unique path. Rather than simply buying Bitcoin, they're mining digital assets like Dogecoin, Litecoin, and others using high-efficiency renewable-powered operations. They've built a self-sustaining treasury model. They're not just speculating, they're deploying next-gen mining rigs and leveraging low-cost hydroelectric energy to stay profitable and sustainable. Now, this positions them to hold, reinvest, or even use their crypto to fuel expansion. For investors, Hyperbit offers a way to gain exposure to the crypto market without the hassle of managing wallets, keys, or even mining operations. They mine, buy, and secure digital assets, making them a diversified play in the space. Check out the link in the bio. Don't forget to read the disclaimer, as all investments are risky. This is not financial advice. When you get into the stock market, you do it at your own risk. Some win, some lose. But I encourage you to check out this company. Let's dive back into the show. So yeah, let me ask you a very important question. Why were the powers at hand ignoring this? Why would you have groups in your country that are actually saying we are serving Satan? That's not a very bright way to live for the ordinary citizens. And they're saying we're committing ritualistic sacrifices, using your citizens, spilling their blood, sacrificing their children. Why is it that it took Bukele to care about this? It shouldn't seem like a very much of a right or left wing issue. This is sort of a good or evil issue. What was it like growing up, and why were they just letting this happen?
It's very clear that the government officials of the past, both right-wing and left-wing, Arena and FMLN, simply did not care about the country they were supposed to represent. They governed for over 30 years. They had every opportunity to make the country better, but they misused it. They intentionally ignored these opportunities because all they cared about at the time was prosperity. All they cared about was doing well themselves, following their political agendas, but not caring about the people, not caring if the future generations are going to have opportunities in education, in the job industries, etc. They didn't care about that. It took a leader that had passion and that genuinely actually believed in this people and cared for this people to make that change. I know what I'm saying might sound a little cliche, might sound a little political, but it's the God-honest truth. You had these people who created a civil conflict. A lot of people died during the Salvadoran civil conflict. Later, it evolved into criminal structures running wild. They never did anything. Why? Because they were serving interests that were designed to create these problems in the nation. For the same reasons I mentioned to you before. If you have a nation in a state of chaos, it is easier you want. If you bring law and order, it becomes very difficult. And that is why they're opposing President Nayib Bukele, because he has brought law and order to El Salvador. And now these criminal groups, these international groups, can't have a say in El Salvador. They can't have their way here anymore, and that's what's making them angry.
Transitioning a little bit here to Bukele and what's happened the last, 4 years here in this country. I don't know if it's been longer. A lot's happened in the last 2 years alone, but the country that I'm experiencing, that I've been in, is not what you grew up in. It's not what people experience. And a lot of people are skeptical of Bukele on the ground because of misinformation. And before I get all CIA, malinformation, disinformation, I mean, genuinely, there's a lot of concerted effort in the United States to mislead people about how Bukele came to power. And as I mentioned earlier, how is he different than a dictator like Maduro or Kim Jong-un? And how is the system here, how, if it was so corrupt, that it switched to a point to where somebody could make such large reforms? We'll talk about the prisons later. We'll talk about some of the accusations later. But let's talk about Bukele himself and his rise to power. Who is Bukele? Like, who is this guy? And how does he go from a no-name internationally, no one knows who he is, to now being, at the White House, with the president, and seems to be rubbing shoulders with the American and global elite. Yeah, where did Bukele come from?
I'll explain something. Bukele and his family, President Bukele and his family, have always been passionate Salvadorans. They have always been entrepreneurs seeking ways to help the Salvadoran people to create jobs and to offer solutions. He showed a passion for politics at a very early age and started as mayor of Nuevo Buscaplan, which is a small sector on the way to Surf City, actually. And later, he passed on to become mayor of San Salvador. His popularity grew more and more with the people because he wasn't your average politician that promised, and once they got in power, they didn't fulfill the promises. No. He was the kind of politician that if he promised something, he would double down and give you what he promised plus something else. And the people saw that. We saw that. And that is why we eventually voted for him to be president, because he delivers. Simple as that. He's an effective leader who delivers. And he is not sold to any kind of interests that will limit him. That is why he is able to deliver on his promises, because most politicians around the world, they owe themselves, whether it's to one group or to another group, they basically sold themselves. So they can't operate independently because they have to get approval for someone else. President Bukele is operating solely under the leadership of God himself. Therefore, he has the liberty to do what's best for his people. Doesn't matter who gets angry, who tries to refute it, who tries to report fake news about it. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the people will have opportunities to thrive. There's only one special interest in El Salvador, and that's the well-being of the Salvadoran people. Nothing more, nothing less. Simple as that. And I want to add the following. The political parties of the past, first we had Arena, which was a right-wing party. They governed for 20 years, a total of 4 presidential terms. What did they do during their time in power? They stole a lot of money, and they made the situation worse for a lot of Salvadorans, which eventually made them vote the left-wing party into power for a total of 2 presidential terms, 10 years. What did the left do? They promised change, but they didn't change anything. The only thing that changed was the color of their party flag. But in action, they were doing the exact same thing that the right wing was doing, the so-called right wing. And then we see Bukele, who runs as a third-party candidate, offering solutions with a history of giving results. Then why not go him into power? Why not defeat that false 2-party system that was a so-called democratic system that only served to divide the people, but didn't care for the people, that made the situation worse for the people, that saw how thousands of their citizens were being murdered every year, and they didn't move an inch to solve that situation. President Bukele not only fortified democracy, because it is worth mentioning that everything that President Bukele's government has done, reforms, laws, etc., everything is within the legal framework of El Salvador, and it is within the Constitution of El Salvador. The fake news media wants to tell you otherwise. They want to make it look like laws are being violated, like the Constitution is being violated. That is not the case. Everything has been done within the legal framework of our nation, and everything has been done for the well-being of the Salvador.
Yeah, so this is kind of crazy, though, because the United States has a little bit of the same problem. We have a uniparty system, a two-party system, where we feel like there's no alternative. There's no action to getting anything done. Right now, Donald Trump is in office. I know he's an ally of Bukele. I know the United States is an ally. I am a registered Republican, and, we are not happy. And Trump acknowledged this, actually, that the United States is even turning on some of its allies, including Israel. He mentioned in an inside meeting, because it appears that maybe Trump is working on behalf of donors, of people who gave to his campaign. I'm not going to ask you to comment on American issues. That's just the state of our politics. I find it really interesting then that, these similar frustrations that we have, even seems like Trump has, where he's noticing, look, I have to do favors for my investors and for my donors, but my base is getting mad. This is a common problem in politics. How the hell does Bukele go around and start a third party without getting killed? Or who let him do this? Because critics are saying, then this is a CIA-backed, legal coup. People claim that, this is some sort of foreign op. And I know that, from my understanding, that's not true. But it's like, what was the pathway then? Did he try the first to go through the two-party system? Was he rejected? How did he go about, not only making a third party but winning?
No, if you look back when he was mayor, he belonged to one of these two parties because they were the only two options that existed at the time. There was no other option. But he wasn't aligned ideologically, especially when he noticed how these parties were letting go of their own nation. If you're a political representative, if you're an elected official, you only have one task, and that is to represent the people who put you there, to create opportunity and a safe environment for the people who elected you. These past government officials from Arena and FMLN, they never did that. And he saw this because he had a pure intention. He was passionate about politics. He was passionate about his nation. And he actually had pure intention. So he saw this. And you won't believe the amount of lashback he received for trying to go independent. It wasn't something that just occurred miraculously. It was a very long battle. There was a lot of legal battles along the way. And eventually, he came out triumphant. Why? Because I truly believe that God has been accompanying this movement for the well-being of the people of El Salvador.
How much percent approval did he get? I mean, was there any evidence that he rigged it?
No. President Bukele has a 90+% approval, and it has remained stable. And the reason it has remained stable is because he has been loyal to the people. He has been loyal to the people that put them there. And I always say, democracy has been fortified in El Salvador now that President Bukele is in office. Sovereignty has been fortified, has been reclaimed. And the reason I say democracy has been strengthened is because now the people have have put aside their ideological differences. This isn't about right-wing, left-wing, no. This is about common sense. This is about doing what's right, doing what's going to benefit everybody who is a Salvadoran citizen. Therefore, both the right wing and the left wing left their ideologies aside, and they came together under common ground. Fight the gangs, restore law and order, create economic opportunities, create opportunities for education, and move the country forward. That's why we're all backing President Bukele, and it's 100% organic. It's not like in other countries where you see leaders like, for example, Chavez or Maduro that impose themselves upon the people. That's not the case. President Bukele has not imposed himself upon anyone. If anything, the people have imposed upon him and demanded that he become president. And that's why he's in office, because we support him fully.
So that being true, we've seen, in constant elections in the United States, Trump, though being in, has gotten severe backlash from the judicial, right, in our economic system. You have lower system and circuit court judges saying and blocking his executive actions. They're sort of coming in. And I know that a president doesn't have ultimate authority. How did Bukele go about dealing with the obvious entrenchment of corruption in the judicial and the legislative here? Did they have to make changes? Did they fire people? Did you have to rewrite the Constitution? I know he got rid of a lot of people, and rightfully so, and it fixed things. It's one thing taking out the criminals, but what about the criminals in office, right? I mean, there was a lot of them here.
Look, to make it simple, maybe I'm not speaking specifically about El Salvador or the United States or any country, I'm generally speaking. A lot of institutions are founded with good intentions, but eventually, throughout the course of years, these institutions become subverted. They become subverted by political interests, sometimes even religious interests, and the list can go on. So when this occurs, you have to learn to root out the corrupt elements. It is the only way. If you have a broken judicial system, you cannot fix a country. That is a proven fact that can be verified by looking at many first world countries who now have areas that appear to be more first world, more third world than actual third world countries. Why does that occur? That occurs because your system is broken. That occurs because it has been subverted by interests that seek to create this chaos. So the only approach is reforming, cleaning it up, draining the swamp. That is the only approach. Because otherwise, what good is it to have a functional president, a functional cabinet, if you have a broken judicial system? What good is it to have a functional judicial system if you have a broken police force, for example? You know, it all adds up into a domino effect, because in order for the country to function properly, all elements, all of the pillars that hold the country together have to work aligned with each other. If they're not working aligned with each other, then you've got a broken clock, my friend.
Yeah, so one of the crazy things that I saw, the fact that he was able to not only get in office, but was able to clear out the judicial, fire corrupt judges, make sure that people, are not opposing this new reform. A lot of critics would say this is a dictatorship. And one of the criticisms of that comes in this new amendment to the Constitution that is eliminating presidential term limits. And as an American, obviously, for our own politicians, that would make me nervous because we already don't have term limits for most of our politicians. And to me, that has bred corruption. We're in a unique situation here. What do you think about this new adjustment of eliminating term limits? Can we apply the same, fears that Americans have in our own system? And if not, why is this different?
Look, I understand that the countries I'm about to mention have a different political system. But for example, Canada doesn't have term limits. Germany doesn't have term limits. Many other countries don't have term limits. I know there's a difference between the presidential and parliamentary systems. However, what difference does it make in the end? Democracy is the will of the people. If you truly want to respect the will of the people, if you truly believe in strengthening democracy, then allow the people to do as they please. Allow the people to elect who they want to elect, and allow the people to do it as many times as they want. That is democracy. Or is that not the definition of the people's will?
Well, but I think the fear people have with eliminating terms, and my personal opinion on this aside, is, with redistricting, gerrymandering, and sort of the way that elections could be manipulated. And they are in the U.S. Our elections are far from fair, as people know. 2020 being a very good example. And back in 2016, they already made magazines with Hillary Clinton on the front thinking that they had fixed the election. They say it's fair and free, but we all know that there's a lot of sketchy things that go on behind the scenes. For critics of Bukele, if it's small, including international critics, are they fair in saying that there's a real fear that Bukele could use the lack of term limits to geoengineer a facade that this is a free democratic country, but indeed sort of usurp ultimate power and become a dictator? Like, what is the way that fear could be satiated or refuted?
Well, let me tell you the following. El Salvador has one of the most fraud-proof election systems in the whole region, in the whole continent, maybe. We have voter ID. We have fingerprint ID. We have paper ballots. We don't do digital systems, Usually, most countries where you see that these kind of situations occur, they're running these sketchy digital systems that you can't really tell what's going on. Over here in El Salvador, we do it elsewhere. They're fair elections. We allow international observers to come to witness every second, every moment. They have full access to even go to rooms where people shouldn't be in, to be there and to report, to see if they find anything sketchy, to see if they see anything that's not right. El Salvador is very open and transparent, and that is something that the international media has tried to twist. They try to make it look like El Salvador is trying to hide its actions. El Salvador is not hiding anything. Oh, I can't. El Salvador is open to the world. CICOT is open to the world. You're a journalist, you want to go to CICOT, you can go to CICOT. You can see the conditions everyone's in. They meet all the international standards. You want to come and see our elections, you can come and see our elections. You can see that there's no awkward things going on. That's a free, democratic election where the people celebrate. They all come out in boards. They vote willingly. No one's pressuring them. Nobody has access to change results or anything because it's open to the public from the moment the elections are open till the moment the elections are closed and counted. So there's no way to rig anything. You'd have to be God himself and perform a miracle, snap your fingers, and make it happen. Otherwise, you can't do it.
So you mentioned international standards, and as a journalist, I try to stay unbiased in my reporting. My personal opinions, my personal views, and what I want for the world should not really come out in this interview. And I say that because what I want from this is I want to bring clarity to the reality here. And I want to verify that what you're saying I can attest to is true. Now, I do encourage people, like you said, if you don't believe me and you don't believe Herbert, then come down for yourself.
Yeah, come and see for yourself.
Whether you're maybe you're not a journalist, maybe you don't have a job, whether you'll get certain security access, but then contact your favorite journalist. Contact someone you trust. Tell them, go request media access. Go down there. Go see for yourself and see what they say. Because there's been a lot of criticism, particularly of something that I know we're all familiar with, which is the CICOT prison. And right now in the United States, there's a series of pretty large protests in the United States and in New York, claiming, I'm sure you've seen this across social media, that it is a concentration camp, that it's a death camp. There's satellite images that people claim to have. They're showing pools of blood, and you're smiling because obviously this is pretty far-fetched here. But I'm going to be pretty honest with you. I was shocked to see how many these things had tens of thousands of likes, Herbert. These are getting millions of views, and the comments were like, "How could this happen? Bukele is a dictator." And the claim is that people who commit basic petty crimes like stealing or maybe even not paying taxes are being sent to this camp, and then people who oppose Bukele, political dissidents, are being mass murdered. And that's actually what is being put on the line, especially in left-wing.
Yeah, there's this conversation.
Yeah, so we need to break this down and talk about CICOT. Let's just start by talking about what is CICOT really like inside, and is there a difference between the way non-violent and violent, meaning rapists and murderers, are treated? Break this down for me. What's really going on inside?
Absolutely. Well, CICOT stands for Terrorist Confinement Center. It was a prison designed specifically to house El Salvador's most dangerous criminals. We're talking the same people that used to murder entire families in a single day, that used to behead children, kidnap people, rape, etc. The worst crimes imaginable. So, in the Terrorist Confinement Center, in CICOT, these criminals are contained in a very strict system which does not allow them to create prison cliques. Like in the past, you used to see how a lot of these gang members created their own cliques within prison, even called out shots from prison. CICOT is the most advanced prison system in the region, and something that the globalist media intentionally omits every time is that it meets all of the international standards for human rights. It meets all of the requirements. But as you yourself mentioned, they want to make it look as if it's some kind of torture camp, when it's clearly not. And it's open to the media. It's open to the public. It's open to international...
Full access, though? Like, I mean, are there certain, places media is not allowed to see? Like, maybe there's... I'm not sure the legal term for it, but when people get into, solitary confinement, I think it's called in the United States, can the media see their place?
There is full access. If you look it up online, there's videos of every corner of that prison online. And the globalist media, they want to invert. They want to make it seem as if it's a torture camp when it's clearly not. It's just a good example for other nations to follow that they can restore law and order in their country. Remember that a lot of these gangs used to run rampant in El Salvador. They used to kill at their own will. They used to extort. They used to rape. They used to kidnap. They made life a living hell for the average citizen. You have to remember that El Salvador is a small country. The majority of its citizens are low income. They were the ones who were affected the most by this violent activity from the criminal structures. Now that these criminals have been put into jail where they belong and they will spend the rest of their lives, the populace is happy and they support President Bukele even more because he has taken the disease, he has taken the cancer away from Salvadoran society and locked it up for never to be seen again. And that's what we, the people, that's what we as Salvadorans support. That's what we want. We were tired of having to look over our shoulder just for going to the beach. We were tired of not being able to walk down the street. We only used to be able to see that in movie films, like, oh, look, it's a movie filmed in the U.S. Look how nice they're walking down the street in New York. That was impossible here in El Salvador. Now it is, thanks to Bukele.
Well, so let me ask you, though, the difference, because the images you see out of CCOT are very extreme. And, what's being said is that this is sort of just a universal place for dissidents. How are the images?
True.
Yeah, what is the difference between a violent criminal and a non-violent criminal? Like, how are they treated differently? Is it really just a violation of human rights? Everybody's sent there. Everybody's, locked up 23 hours a day. What does it look like if I was a murderer versus if I, didn't use a weapon, but, stole some money out of a cash register or something like that? Would I go to CCOT? What's the difference?
No, CCOT is exclusively for the most violent gang members known to man.
Okay.
Exclusively for murderers, rapists, extortionists, etc. And it's worth mentioning that, yes, while it is a very strict system, yes, it's not pleasant to be in CCOT, but it's not pleasant to have your family killed overnight either, These are criminals and they're paying for their actions. As President Bukele himself said, God may forgive them. They might have a spiritual turnaround while they're in prison. God might forgive them, but we don't have to forgive them. They have to pay for what they did. And that's what they're currently doing. These guys are never going to see the light of day. And the reason is because, one, they belong to criminal structures, which have been designated terrorist structures here in El Salvador. And two, the amount of murders, kidnappings, etc., that they committed, that they're looking over 100 years to life in prison, And when it comes to non-violent criminals, there's huge programs in place right now teaching them to become a part of the workforce, teaching them how to build structures, how to build furniture, how to pave roads. And they are allowed to go out of prisons, to work, to put their skills to the test, to later be reintegrated into society. But these are non-violent criminals. Sometimes the media gets it wrong and they show these programs as if the murderers are going to be released again. No, they're not going to be released again. The murderers are in there.
That's not by accident. The media's done a lot of work.
They do it intentionally because they attempt, Elijah, to confuse people. As the president himself has said, they try to make good appear as if it were evil, and they want to make evil appear as if it were good.
So let's talk about that. I want to jump into it's a little bit of a different section I had here, okay. but I think this ties in. There are real rehabilitation programs here, which I think is pretty interesting. We can still touch on that. But, a lot of media is owned and operated by the same groups, by NGOs, by large investment 10 corporations. Yes, 10 corporate large investment firms. And it seems like they do have an agenda. That agenda is a left-wing agenda. And I don't know. I ask you, does Bukele see himself, because he didn't go with the right or left, is he a right-wing government? Because his ideas are inherently right-wing. And I know that there seems to be a lot of opposition here to defining Bukele's, government as a right wing, or, a lot of these buzzwords are seen as sort of dark here, like fascist or police state, or things that are thrown around by these media outlets, particularly in Western countries. What is the government here, and why does it seem like the people that oppose it the most are the left in Western nations? It is these corporations and globalists.
All right, first let's go over the fact that you mentioned. The majority of the big names in media, it's true, they're owned by as little as 10 corporations globally. They can send out a memo and initiate a disinformation campaign in an instant. It's called character assassination. It's what they try to do to anyone that opposes the globalist system. You're a leader that's going to fight for your people and not for foreign interests? Well, disinformation, snap your fingers, send the memo, and all the media outlets globally start the campaign against you. But these campaigns don't work when you have the receipts. When you can prove to the world that these changes, these positive changes in El Salvador aren't just media headlines, they aren't political propaganda, there's something that you yourself can come and witness. You can physically come and see the positive changes in El Salvador, and that's what we have to our advantage. Because a lot of the time, countries or political leaders are attacked by this globalist system, but they have no way to refute the attacks. We can. We have all the evidence. Come to El Salvador. Come and see for yourselves how this nation has gone from being a dark murder capital of the world to becoming the safest country in the Western Hemisphere. That doesn't happen overnight, but in El Salvador it did. Why didn't it happen? Because we put the people first. And President Bukele achieved something that not many leaders are able to achieve. He brought social unity. We have to understand that the people are the heart of a nation. They're the core. They're the organs. They're everything. They're the soul of a country. If you divide the people, you're making that country very, very ill. You're making it very sick. President Bukele managed to bring them all together and find common ground, which in today's day and age is becoming increasingly difficult around the world to find common ground. As the globalist elite have been so successful in splitting once successful nations, dividing them completely into enemies. These are brothers and sisters that we're talking about. These are people that live in the same land, that are under the same flag, and they become enemies because of political ideology. So, clearly, President Bukele, he doesn't call himself right-wing or left-wing. If anything, I would call him a traditionalist. I would say that he follows common sense and that he is very well aligned with the public sentiment.
What an amazing sit down this has been. Circling back for a quick moment here on the crypto angle that we touched on earlier, it's wild how digital assets are flipping the script on corporate finance. And if you're into how businesses are adapting to this volatile yet rewarding space, Hyperbit Technologies is worth a closer look. We talked about giants like MicroStrategy and Tesla stacking Bitcoin on their books as a smart treasury move, treating it like a digital gold to combat inflation and preserve value. But Hyperbit, listed as HYPE on the Canadian Stock Exchange and HYPAF in the US, it takes up a notch. They're not passive holders. They're actively mining coins like Dogecoin, Litecoin, and more with their cutting-edge eco-friendly setups powered by renewables. This creates a dynamic treasury that's constantly growing through production, not just purchases. And then what sets them apart? Advanced rigs optimized for efficiency, paired with affordable hydroelectric power, ensuring they mine profitably while keeping their carbon footprint low. It's a strategy that lets them accumulate assets, reinvest growth, or even pivot to new opportunities in the crypto ecosystem. If you're an investor eyeing crypto exposure, Hyperbit simplifies it all. No need to deal with hardware, security headaches, or market timing. They handle the mining, acquisitions, and safeguarding, giving you a broad, resilient entry into the sector. Remember, check it out under HYPAF and HYPE. Link is in the bio for more details. Okay, let's get back to the conversation. Don't forget to invest at your own risk. This is not financial advice. Now let's get back to Herbert and listen to what he has to say about El Salvador. So you do acknowledge, though, that there are left-wing groups. There are maybe even some right-wing groups. I don't know. But there are these NGOs and people who oppose Bukele.
Uniparty groups.
So uniparty groups. This seems to be a cancer in every single nation, Herbert. Something that it's like I have friends, all over the world. I have my family's Australian American. And, America and Australia are obviously, European colonies and of Europeans. And you go back to Europe and they have some of these same problems. It seems like the Western world is infected by something that the East is not. You go into China, you see solidarity. I don't support communism. I'm not personally a fan of the CCP, but I do respect the way that Xi Jinping has been able to bring social unity between his ethnic group of people, sometimes at questionable means. But I think that the West and this uniparty acts like they have some moral, up on the East. But the uniparty just hides the wrong from the people. The corruption, the way they work with the media, it's so diabolical. It makes you wonder, especially with this Epstein situation, what's really going on? And I have to understand this, Bukele, he's punching up. He's in a small nation. This nation should be insignificant in the global stage, yet it seems like people not only respect him, but the U.S. is extraditing criminals to even, go to CCOT. the way that they're handling crime is being a model, right, for the international community. And it's kind of like, well, who wouldn't want this to succeed? That's a bit suspicious. Who would be mad at a leader for fixing a country? Who are these groups?
You see, this is why they get angry when they hear about the possibility of President Bukele being reelected for a third term. It is because the false democracy that they promote in Western nations is great. The left and the right, they're sold out to special interests. They end up serving the same purpose, even if they have different ideological values and ideas. And that's the difference of when you have a leader who has sold out versus a leader who has not sold out, like President Bukele. They are free to function. They're free to play. You're free to do what's best for the people and not have to ask for permission all the time. So another point that is worth mentioning, when you mention the West, it makes it seem as if the West is intentionally doing this. No, the West is a victim. It's a victim of a parasitic system that has slowly subverted its institutions. It has slowly turned the system into a democracy, which is false. It's democratic in name, but not in practice. And another thing that is very important to mention about the positive change we are seeing in El Salvador is that, as you said, it has become a global example. How did El Salvador go from being a country that was known for murders to becoming a global example? It's as simple as a David versus Goliath situation. We are a very small country that is very brave, that is very firm and committed. And we have proven to the world that when you behave like this, you can be small in size, but if you're big in heart, you can make very important changes that have saved thousands of lives, Elijah, future generations. El Salvador was lost. There was no future here, which is why a lot of Salvadorans chose to leap towards the United States, to immigrate illegally in the past.
So many of them, by the way. So many of them.
Right. Yeah, we have good Salvadoran communities, big Salvadoran communities in L.A. and Virginia and Texas, everywhere in the States, I believe. But that is because there was no future here. The people were basically obligated to leave, to seek refuge somewhere. And now you see the opposite. You see Salvadorans coming back to El Salvador. You see the percentage numbers of immigrants towards the U.S. have severely dropped. They've drastically dropped. People from El Salvador aren't leaving towards the U.S. bordering more. You only see Mexico skyrocketing. You only see neighboring countries skyrocketing, but El Salvador has gone down. The people are happy here. They want to stay here. President Bukele has also made it his mission to provide the same first world opportunities that they used to seek in other nations, to provide them here in our territory, to develop our talent, our people in their home country. Why should you be obligated to leave the homeland that your grandparents inherited? Why? Why should you leave the house that was given to you? Because of crime? No, crime's a thing of the past. And now El Salvador's government is working carefully and strategically to fortify the pillars that are important for a healthy society: education, job opportunity, foreign investment, tourism, and obviously law and order, which is what we are now known for.
Yeah, so let's transition here into what some of the dangers are going to be for this nation, or what some of the opportunities are going to be. As I drive around on the streets, the feeling that I get from walking on the streets is one of security, and I don't feel unsafe. I'm about to come back with my two beautiful young children and my wife, and they're excited. And the first thing, my mother-in-law asked was, is it safe? Right? I go, honestly, it's safer than Miami. I go, it is. But one of the things that's always interesting about America versus the third world or the second world or a developing nation is that oftentimes countries look unsafe and they are unsafe. The United States often looks safe, but it often is not, right? So you don't necessarily have huge security gates in Miami and razor wire and all this stuff. So it has this first world appearance. But if you look at the crime stats, right? If you look at LA crime stats, you start to see it's almost egotistical to claim that we're first world, because it's like, that's first world infrastructure, third world crime. I get the reverse here. I get that you walk on the street, and if I weren't to know what's really going on, I would assume I was in grave danger, because the amount of security the buildings have. You get a very South African vibe here in architecture. Not here in the green zone, but when you go into the neighborhoods, there's going to have to be a real change here to attract people, to attract development. Why do you think that the people here still have their buildings and their houses set up for, it looks like, to be in the midst of a gang war? Is it just too expensive to change? Is it that they don't feel the stability is here, that they have the right to take it down? Is it the government would have to offer action? What is that?
The honest answer is because we come from a gang war. We come over 30 plus years of a very unsafe environment, a civil war followed by criminal structures. And you got to keep in mind that this positive change that President Bukele has achieved in El Salvador, it's occurred in under 6 years. So it's obvious that you will still see remnants of how people used to think in the past and how they used to feel in the past. It's true, you had to fortify your homes. You have to you even have to put steel on your windows to avoid break-ins. You have to set up these big walls around your house. That's a part of the past. And I'm confident, I'm sure that as time goes on, people will start leaving that behind. There's other beautiful neighborhoods, and they're not gated neighborhoods, that don't follow these patterns anymore. You see a lot of people that are taking the walls down as well. You see a lot of people that aren't afraid to leave their door open anymore. And I believe that, as I mentioned, it takes time to heal. It doesn't happen overnight. So El Salvador is in the process of healing. The disease has been removed. Now is when the patient has to work towards getting in tip-top shape again. And that's what we're experiencing.
So let's talk about that in a conclusion here for the future of El Salvador and where it's headed. I've seen pictures, and it blows my mind. I was working in Shanghai, and you see what it looked like in the 1950s, and you see the time lapse, right, from 1950s to today. It's now one of the most populated, advanced, global cities of the world. It's fantastic, by the way, despite Western propaganda that says otherwise. And, another example, Singapore went from, sort of a rice paddy, port right there in the middle of the ocean to a metropolis of modern, super modern proportions. I would say that even puts American cities to shame. What is Bukele's vision for this country, and how rapid is it in terms of where should El Salvadorans expect to be going? And do you think you're actually going to get there, and how long?
I do believe we're going to get there, and I attribute that to my faith in God, because I know He's accompanying every step of the way. I know He's guarding over our president. I know a lot of people will probably think, oh, this guy's using God for everything that he says. He's being cliche. He's trying to use religion to sway how people think. No, not at all. It's something that I truly believe. I truly believe God. And when you have God besides, there's no way you can fail. You can have the whole world against, and you will always surpass every obstacle, every challenge. You'll make it. You'll make it out of that. El Salvador has proven, thanks to God and to President Bukele's leadership, that it made it out of a very dark situation that seemed impossible to get out of. And now that we are healing, that we are building, that we are reconstructing everything that was destroyed in the past, I believe that El Salvador has a very prominent future. I see this country becoming as the technology hub of Central America. I see a lot of investment coming in. I see a lot of job opportunities, education opportunities. This government has worked more than any other government in terms of education. They want to provide proper schools for our children, schools that give them dignity, that teach them, that form them into outstanding citizens. We want to be able to also provide opportunities once they go off to university, be able to fund their studies, and create a new generation of professionals. Because El Salvador, for a very long time, Elijah, has had great talent. It has had amazing talent, but it all went to waste due to lack of opportunities and to forced migration and to many that were murdered. A lot of people had dreams just like we do. They had goals, they had families, but that was taken away from them by satanic gangs who didn't value their life.
Well, and the Singapore reference I bring up is because I see the rapid ascension here.
It's quick,
and
it's happening very quick.
But I also know that Singapore is well known for having what are considered extreme laws. I mean, you can't have bring bubble gum, and also, the laws.
You're allowed to bring bubble gum to El Salvador.
Well, see, I know, but what people are, what I know there too is, it's very common. People know that you can be incarcerated for life and also executed for drug trade, and some people call their government fascist, but yet the world respects them now. Singapore would be a respected nation, and if the media was like it was today back in the 70s and 80s when Singapore was rising up, I think that they would have been lambasted as being a disgusting right-wing extremist, Hitlerian type of ethno state. And yet at the same time, the leadership did what they needed to do. And I remember that the leader saying something similar to what Bukele said, like, what is more extreme? Common sense laws that are standards for all men to abide by so that we can reach a common and a greater good, or letting people do whatever they want so we appear good to the media, right? Letting people suffer. And I know Bukele mentioned a similar thing of like, the media wants us to suffer so that we appear to be good to them rather than for us to actually do good. They care about how they think about us, not what's really the state of who we are. How far do you think Bukele is willing to go to accomplish the greater good? Does he have what it takes to oppose the media and the international cartels and the international banking clans does he have what it takes, or should we be scared? Should the people realize that this is not that he's not capable, but this is a really dark thing. I mean, how do we not know they're just not going to kill him? The international community is known to wage coups. You see Ukraine, what's going on there. What is your thoughts on his protection and the international community to accomplish what he's supposed to do?
Well, look, he's been fighting the globalist system off for the past 6 years, and I have faith that he can easily do it for the next 10 or even more if the people will it. Now, what I will tell you is that I do see the inspiration that you mentioned regarding Singapore. Yes, we want to develop El Salvador. We want to become a powerhouse and hopefully even lead eventually to a Central American Union. I mean, Central American countries should be united, and if there's a leader capable of doing it and achieving it, it's definitely President Bukele. Now, what I will tell you is that the comparisons to other leaders don't apply because President Bukele isn't authoritarian as they paint him in the international news. These are smear campaigns. I know that in some cases, maybe being strong, being strict isn't necessarily something to be looked down upon. And he has been very strong and very strict, but he's not authoritarian. Everything that he's done has not trampled anything. Like, it has been within the rule of law, within the legal framework of El Salvador, within the constitutional framework of El Salvador. No laws have been trampled. No laws have been ignored. No loopholes have been put into play. It's all been done by the book. That's not authoritarian. That's just using the system in a smart way, using the system in an appropriate manner as it's meant to be used. The problem is that global politics have become so soft. Global politics have become so corrupted to a point that they want the citizen to believe, look, if your nation's on fire and you're getting mugged, you're getting killed, it's okay. It's meant to be that way. That's what they're teaching people. They want them to live with the problem. They're teaching them to live with the problems instead of solving the problems. And that is the difference in El Salvador. They see a leader who actually wants to solve the core issues as authoritarian or being too strong-handed. No.
So is that a bad word, though?
Not necessarily.
Because sometimes I think there's a little bit of a fear here that we play into, not we, but like we, as in people, play too into the media in terms of like a good example is, like, obviously El Salvador doesn't reflect a communist or a Nazi worldview. But there is a contradiction in American politics where, they say they're against genocidal or regimes, and you'll see people flying a communist hammer and sickle while having a sign with a swastika crossed out. And you're going, I totally understand the swastika crossed out. You're against this sort of, ideas that you don't like these ideas. You feel like they led to atrocities in the world. And fair enough. But how could you then display another symbol which had led to greater atrocities and more people killed? You should be consistent intellectually. If you're against these extremist views leading to atrocities, then be against all of them and don't be a hypocrite. I feel like, there's a lot of hypocrisy, but, authoritarianism in and of itself, though those are both authoritarian regimes, does not necessarily lead to death. It doesn't necessarily lead to destruction. And democracy doesn't necessarily lead to life. Democracy, in and of itself, in many countries, has been abused and falsified, has led to, I believe, avoidable wars. Like Ukraine is completely avoidable, in my opinion. So it's like, is Bukele, so Bukele wouldn't call himself an authoritarian, but is why does it feel like people here are afraid to adopt sort of that idea that, you know, they are wielding the power of the law, the Constitution, the police, but not in a way that is against the will of the people, right? That's what's a negative about authoritarianism.
But I want to go deeper. As I mentioned originally, nothing that's being done by the Bukele government
Is illegal.
is illegal.
No,
Everything is within the constitutional framework and within the legal framework of.
I verified that, by the way. You made the claim, and I verified it.
So now, to go on from this, what we're seeing here is appropriate use of power. The problem is that most countries, especially Western countries that have been subverted and are being destroyed from within, are so used to living with the problem instead of solving the problem that when someone comes along and they use power accordingly, as it has been granted by the Constitution and the laws of the state, they see it as something to gasp about. They see it as authoritarianism when it's not. It's simply proper use of power. The same power that we democratically gave to President Bukele. A lot of world leaders hold themselves back from using this power, and that is not because it's bad to use it. If it's there for a purpose to solve these kind of issues. The reason they don't use it is because the foreign interests they often sell out to do not allow them to use it because they have darker agendas in play. For example, we see how in Europe there are large masses of migrants coming into countries that were once first world, and now they have basically turned their capitals into dangerous favelas.
Harris and London.
And why is this? Is this because it was meant to happen organically? No, this is constructed. This is called social engineering. It has been occurring throughout the decades, throughout the centuries in many different ways. And these leaders who are in power, who are not putting an end to this social engineering, they're not using the power that has been granted to them. Why? Because they have someone pulling their chain. They have someone yanking their chain. This is the difference between a leader that's sold out to interests versus a leader who is independent and actually serving his people.
I want to end on a controversial question here.
Okay.
But it's something that's important to me as an American and somebody who's interested in what's going on here. It's pretty damn fascinating what's happening in general across the board, socially, spiritually. I mean, it's fantastic. But the United States is fully bought and sold for, and not every politician. If Thomas Massey is one of them who's refused to take money from foreign entities like AIPAC. But our system has been exploited by corporations and by foreign countries to serve against the will of the people. And it's come to a point now where I don't even believe that a lot of our politicians even have the United States people as their concern number 3. I think you have foreign country first, corporations second, maybe third. You also have, inside political interests from political insiders. Maybe the Americans are fourth and fifth, and it's disheartening because it's such a large cabal and such a deeply international, clique and gang, and it feels like it's beyond repair. If Bukele's not controlled by these people, which appears he hasn't, I haven't seen him go to any nation and do some weird ritual or, align himself with some, a CFR or Bilderberg group or something like to that regard. How is he actually going to accomplish any of this without capitulating? And as I saw, even knowing some of these groups, you have to work with them. Like, you're going to have to work with these corrupt groups to accomplish things internationally. How is he going to find means to accomplish, international goals that he has for this country so that you guys can play on an international stage without having to capitulate to these lobbyists, to these groups that have corrupted such powerful nations like even the United States fell to them? And I say that to me, that's not your statement. That's my statement as an American, as a journalist there. How is he going to do that if America could have, and American politicians couldn't do it?
Well, that's where Bitcoin comes into play. If they can't control your money, they can't control your will, And I think it's very important that El Salvador, part of reclaiming El Salvador's sovereignty was implementing Bitcoin as national currency. And it will pay off in the future. Of that, I am very sure. I can't answer on behalf of President Bukele because I'm just an independent political analyst. I don't know what he's thinking, what he's planning, but I can tell you that I have my utmost respect for him. I believe in him, and I know that if he's been able to fight off the system all along, he'll continue to fight it off successfully. Because at the beginning, it was a lot more difficult than it is now. No, right now, a lot of the major issues of the nation of El Salvador have been solved, which creates a playing field that is more clear, a more clear view of what's to come, on what needs to be worked on what will be worked on. So I have absolute trust, just as over 90% of the Salvadoran population does.
Yeah, it's interesting. So overarching the entire, discussion, what I've seen here is that things are being done that are sort of sideswiping the international cabal that has captivated the hearts and the minds of the elite class across most of the Western world and developed world. So this Bitcoin situation, I notice they still take US dollars here. So, I would imagine a lot of people see the inflation happening in this country and would probably blame Bukele, maybe even his critics, but maybe they don't know the inflation of the US dollar is international. It's probably very independent of anything Bukele would do. The dollar's just lost a lot of its value. I just asked with the Bitcoin, I mean, is there any plans to wean off the US dollar here to join BRICS or to, further entrench the country's reserves in Bitcoin? Because there's no way you guys are going to escape the cabal or be able to do this while you remain on the US dollar for life. I mean, they had to have thought that through.
Honestly speaking, from an independent point of view, I can't really make an opinion on that because I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but I can tell you that the U.S. is our greatest ally, and there's it's not likely that El Salvador would even consider something like BRICS, in my opinion. And I will mention something that is very important. The reason that a lot of these global elites are so upset against the nation of El Salvador is because we have sparked a domino effect. A lot of Latin American nations are now following the Bukele model. In fact, a lot of first world nations are also being inspired by the Bukele model. What does this tells you? This tells you that not only has he inspired the peoples of the world, but he has put a lot of sold-out politicians in flight or fight mode. They don't know what to do because the populace is rising globally. They see that there's a different way of doing things. There's a different way to handle the affairs of a nation successfully without any negative comeback, where only positive results, yielding only the best results imaginable. So the majority of people want leaders like these. And a lot of leaders will pretend to be like President Bukele, will get in office, but they won't deliver the same way that he has delivered. And that is the key and focal point, is that he is independent of foreign interests. And that is why El Salvador is now a successful nation compared to how bad it was, and will continue growing and continue becoming more successful, offering great opportunities in every sector to its own citizens.
Yeah, Herbert Esmahan, I think it's been lovely talking to you. And I said lovely because it's really, really hopeful in a lot of ways of what can happen in this nation. And the fact that, to clarify, you're not being paid by the government to be here. I'm not paying you to be here. You weren't coached on what to say. And I think a lot of people are so used to the inauthenticity, and perhaps the way you carry yourself is more of a politician, right? You carry yourself like somebody with that sort of authority. Americans can start saying, oh, what's really going on here? In fact, I actually posted that we were going to be interviewing people like, who's paying for this? Unfortunately, I mentioned this as a joke. I'm like, guys, I've been working with, I've either had jobs with or made films with like Fox News, Newsmax, Daily Wire, Blaze TV, Gateway. And here's the problem is that actually, a lot of these companies are actually being paid by special interest groups. And I wanted to form my own media company, RiftTV, and we publish on some of these publications. We're publishing this on the Gateway Pundit, who's been very kind to let us use their publication. The CEO there has really believed in the journalism we've been doing, despite critics of myself, because I won't take special interest money for my interviews from foreign nations, particularly from Israel or related proxies. I don't believe in taking money from them. I don't think they have our interest in heart. I think they have their interest. That's good for them. Every nation should have their own interest at heart. So God bless any nation that cares about their own people the most. I'm an American, and I care about America and American interests. I think El Salvador is El Salvadoran, and I care about their interests because they're caring for their people, and I feel like we're allies in that.
I can ally with a country that cares about their country, but isn't trying to exploit my nation. And I don't think El Salvador is trying to exploit the U.S., and I pray to God the U.S. doesn't try to exploit El Salvador. But to the people that are wondering, towards the end of an interview like this, the funder of this is us, and it's you guys as well. If you do want to support, go to ElijahSchaefer.locals.com. It's independent, related to Rumble. Rumble also is funded by Tether, whose headquarters are here. Not that there's a connection to me, but it shows you as decentralized media, we're all sort of part of this ecosystem of people who are trying to break free. And we're all interested in Bitcoin. We're all interested in how to get out of this system. And you don't have to be racist. You don't have to be hateful. You don't have to be, identitarian. You don't have to be anything. What you need to do is have a firm belief in what you know, what you understand, and recognize, as they say on the streets, real recognizes real. So notice where things are happening and who wants to work together. We're going to have to cooperate. And so, Herbert, I just, always give the audience a little bit at the end. If you have any last words for people, people that feeling a lack of hope in their own country, you just said how bad it was here, how good it's gotten, and how much better it's going to get. For the rest of the Western world, do you think the Bukele model could work for us? Are we too broken? Do you have any hope for people in the United States, which is the majority of our audience, millions of people that watch this stuff? What would you say to them who say, we need a Bukele in the United States, and we do want Trump to stand up? So, we want Trump to be that Bukele. Please be that man. What's the hope for us to see something like this?
Look, my message to the people of the world in general, not to any specific nation, just to the globe, is that there is always hope. It doesn't matter how far gone your country is. There's always a way back. But you need competent leaders, and you need to place God first. That is essential. This war is not only political. It's not a battle of the egos between politicians and Davos. It also has a very strong spiritual element to it. And as long as we're not aware to that, we won't find the solutions that we need. So place God first, be a good citizen, follow tradition, and your country can't be saved.
Appreciate you, Herbert.
So great to have you on.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir. To the rest of you guys watching, have a great rest of the week as always. Don't forget to check out our YouTube and Rumble channels. It's at the RiftTV. You can find the links in the description, and feel free to support any of our sponsors in the articles if you're watching this, or in the description, as we aren't putting ad reads in this. It's provided ad-free to you guys, but as you support our sponsors, you also will support your vision to see a freer and a truer media. Have a great rest of the week, and may God bless the United States of America and El Salvador. I'm signing out.